Welcome to Drinks in the Library, the only library where drinks aren't just allowed, they are required. I'm your librarian host, Gigi Howard, and each episode I'll be interviewing a guest about a much-loved book that we will be pairing with a drink for you to enjoy along with us or consider for your next book club meetup. As always, stay curious and support your local library. Hello, Libration Nation. This week's book is Color, A Natural History of the Palate by Victoria Finley, and I am talking about it with my friend, Julia Marshel. Julia is an artist and an author and is someone who sees the world through a lens of wonder and joy. From a young age, she discovered that if you look closely, the world reveals an infinite variety of amazing things. And it's that same sense of discovery has become a gift that she and her wife, Claudia, have shared with their 3 daughters, raising them to see and celebrate the beauty in nature. Her books, How Many Will We Find? And My Friend the Maple Tree, illustrate this love and her desire to pass it on to others. Our drink this week is a Boulevardier, which I chose because of its beautiful red color. And interestingly enough, the red comes from Campari, which originally came from Carmine. And that is one of the colors that Julia talks about in the episode. Spoiler, the original was bug blood. I really hope you enjoy this episode. It was amazing to talk to Julia about her experience being an artist, being creative, and taking risk. Without further ado, here's the episode. This is what I like to do, obviously. I run our book club. That's how you and I know each other.
Talk about books, see
Talk
things.
about a book.
I'm so amazed that you have this all set up in here. It's very impressive. You got your whole studio.
I do.
Look at you.
And I was just...
You're just making it happen.
I went to a podcasting
Seminar kind of training
festival thing a couple weeks ago,
right.
but I was like, I thought it was like a local. It's called the Resonate Podcast Festival. And I thought it was like, oh, other local podcasters. No, it's like one of the biggest podcast festivals.
And it's here?
Here in Richmond.
We are so hip. I'm telling you, we're like the number one place to visit on some people's lists.
Yeah, it's a great place. But I was just like there, I felt like such a fish out of water. Like every person I met was a journalist, a producer, an editor. They were people there that worked for Netflix. Like it was like this huge, and they're like, so what do you do? And I'm like, well, I'm a librarian. And I kind of started my own. Like, that's so sweet. We love, it was sort of that kind of situation. They were very kind. I made a friend there. So,
and you braved it anyway.
I did. Yeah, I sat there with all of these pros and
rock on.
Listened to them talking about how to create story. And anyway, it was I learned a lot.
That's great.
So,
I mean, why do something if you can't learn?
Yeah. I mean, that's the whole journey of it. You start off not knowing. I mean, learning how to do all of this has just been crazy. So anyway, Julia, thank you for being with me today. So do you want to start off with talk about the book a little bit? We're talking about color, the history of the palate. So who were you when you picked this book up?
When I picked this book up, I had just started taking an art class at the VMFA because I thought, I'm a middle-aged white woman. What do we do? We paint.
Yeah.
So I said,
okay.
Got to do this. And it was COVID, and I wanted something to do, and I knew one day I would retire, and I thought painting sounded like fun.
So you never painted before that?
I think 30 years ago I took a class.
Okay.
So I'm in this class with Dawn Flores at the VMFA. They have studio art classes, and she does a watercolor one. And so she recommended a number of different books. And this was one of them.
Okay.
And I thought, there's a backstory behind everything. What might it be behind my palate? And so I got the book.
Okay. All right. And so guide us through, what is this book about?
So this book is by Victoria Finley. It's called Color. And there is a story behind everything. And so every color you see, often it first came from somewhere. We can make a lot of them today chemically, but it came from something. It came from a walnut skin, right, and walnut husk or something like that. So she travels around the world and she goes to the places that are sources of early colors. She'll visit where ochre was mined, where people got lapis lazuli to make blue, to make ultramarine blue. She travels all around the world talking about the history behind each of the different colors.
So she's a journalist, and so that's how she kind of got into it. Very cool. So you picked the book, I picked the drink. You were like, I could care less what it is, basically. And because it's color, I wanted to pick something that had a lot of color. I didn't want to pick anything that was artificial. So this is a Boulevardier, which I don't know exactly, but it has Campari in it, which gives it like the beautiful red
And it is very
color.
lovely.
Yes, and then I put the orange slice in there.
I think the lighter color of orange kind of sets off the darker red of the drink.
Yes, it's very pretty, and we'll talk about color a little bit. So what do we know about Victoria Finley? I listened to a podcast with her, and so she was just talking about her fascination always with this kind of thing. And I think you do have to be a very specific type of person.
Right, you really got to want to know why and what.
Yes. So what did you learn? What's your favorite story about color from this?
So many.
Okay.
One of the things that I found fascinating was how people got to the different things. So you think about colors as being, the part of color is also black and white, right? And so often artists will use charcoal, which you don't really, like where does that come from? What is that anyway? Well, if you see that right there, the vine charcoal people have today, it's long. So you're looking at a piece of.
At it?
Yep, it's long. It's skinny. It almost looks like a willow branch or a vine branch that was carefully charcoalized, and it is. So there was this dude way back when that his whole family's what they did was they took willow branches and wove baskets. And guess what? Along comes the Industrial Revolution. They can't weave willow baskets anymore. And so what is he going to do? One day they accidentally put a box of willow branches next to the fire and it charcoalized.
Okay.
And he goes, oh, maybe there's something here. And it took him years of burning and burning and burning in different ways to come up with the perfect charcoal. And that's what that's based on. That's made out of grapevines. But that's what it's based on today. So I love the way that people come upon these things accidentally almost sometimes, and then by necessity.
Yeah. Do you have...
Can I tell you a couple of other colors that are really fun?
I would love that.
So the other thing about color is if you think about fashion, when something new comes along, people are so excited to get it. So take red, for example. People made red out of all kinds of things, but they couldn't get a dark, bright red. And then the conquistadors happen, right? They head over from Europe to the Americas. They go romping around, and they discover a red there. And they import it back, and people love it. And it becomes this massive industry of this dark, vibrant red, which is carmine today, you'd call it. And for maybe 200 years, the Spaniards were able to keep secret where it came from because there was so much money in importing it in to Spain and to Europe. And it turns out where it actually came from was this little bug that they would infest prickly pear plants, and you would squish the bug and get the blood.
Oh.
So they had entire plantations of people raising these bugs, the cochineal bug, on the prickly pear plant and harvesting them very carefully because, of course, it's a cactus, and grinding them up and turning them into this red paint that they would send back. And they literally had armies guarding this across the ocean from Europe so people wouldn't understand it and steal it.
Yeah. From blood.
From blood, right, exactly.
Bug blood.
From bug blood. That's right. And another one that is really interesting is this one right here. See that stone? See that beautiful blue?
Yeah.
Of that stone? It might even remind you when you see a Renaissance painting and you see the Virgin Mary. And she's in that bright, deep blue. That's ultramarine.
Okay.
And at first I thought, oh, ultramarine. That means more blue or really blue, but it doesn't actually. It means across the sea because in the Renaissance era, they discovered that stone in Afghanistan. And they would import it across the ocean and grind it up. And it was the only thing they painted with that was more expensive than that was gold.
Okay. Wow. Something that's interesting I thought about the book is just, I think today we just have access to so many different colors you don't even think about
Right.
where it came from, but like the history of, like you were saying, fashion. What were the original colors that people were wearing and using?
And for millennia, people have been finding ways to make color, to turn it into beauty, to turn it into memory, to turn it into whatever.
Yeah.
Like ochre, for example. Right? They dug red ochres or yellow ochres, which is really just colored clay.
Yeah.
And use it. And you still see it on the walls, places like Lascaux in France. You can still see the ochre paintings.
Wow.
Another one I thought, sometimes too, they have really interesting backgrounds. So there was this yellow called India yellow. And for years, they would, every now and again, pots of it would come out of India. People didn't know how, they didn't know where, they didn't know how it got made. And so finally somebody went over there to figure it out. And they discovered it was one village who were feeding cows mango leaves.
Oh.
Then the cows would pee. Oh. They would turn that into the yellow, to the India yellow.
So bug blood, cow urine, cow
crushed
pee.
Crushed up rocks. So I found that very fascinating. I found it really, really amazing that it didn't surprise me when I was a child. Have you ever seen pokeberries? They grow as a weed around here. It's a tall plant. It's got a center stalk and big leaves and a little bunch of purple berries that come off of it. And you might actually complain about it because if your kid gets a hold of it and smears it, then you've got a purple stain somewhere.
Ooh, okay.
Well, growing up, we had pokeberries in our backyard because we weren't always the tidiest backyard people. But you could smush them and you could make ink out of them.
Wow.
So you could draw and you could paint with them. And ever since then, I've been fascinated by people's ability to make colors from natural things. And so I read the book. And then I discovered, you see that one there with the big P on it? That tube of paint? It's called Yavapai. Daniel Smith actually makes a series of paints out of taking rock, crushing it up, and putting it in like a gum arabic to smooth it out, to turn it into paint. So that picture there, the light color of the picture is actually, that's a picture of rocks in Bandelier that's actually painted with rocks.
Wow.
Because it's painted with Yavapai.
Rocks on rocks.
Exactly.
Very cool. So, like, let's talk about your experience as an artist. So we started in COVID. And how did that expand?
Well, for me, it started as a terrifying experience.
Oh.
You know, like, what if I do it wrong?
Yeah.
What if people don't like it? What if I
Yeah.
can't do it? But if you really want to do something, you got to hear all that and you got to keep going anyway, right? I mean, you must have done that with this podcast. Right?
Still doing it.
There you go. There you go. You just keep on trying.
Right, yeah.
And so I really wanted to do it. And so I kept trying and I kept trying and I kept trying. And I am just beginning to be able to know a little bit in advance when you put two colors next to each other, how they're going to react to each other. Because it's so complex, like the lightness, the darkness, the shades, and a color can look like one thing, but you put it next to something else and it looks completely different.
Yeah.
And so for me, I have found it a fascinating journey because there is always something to learn. And there are so many things to learn. I am always grateful when I recognize there's one thing. I've got one thing that I've learned in this picture that I've been able to remember and carry it through. It's been wonderful, terrifying, fascinating.
Yeah.
And one of the early ways I helped myself keep going, I like to have an end product. I like to have a goal. And so I started painting, and I was painting picture after picture after picture. I'm like, what am I going to do with all these pictures? And then my sister got pregnant, and she was going to have twins, and I got all excited, and I thought, wow, is there a way I could share my pictures of nature with the twins? So I decided to make a book.
Yeah.
And I made a counting book. So the pictures of nature that I'd painted, one blue heron and two water lilies. And that was so much fun. I did another one.
Yeah.
So I walk every morning, and we have a lot of maple trees in our neighborhood. And as you walk past the maple tree all through the year, it turns out it's always doing something beautiful. And the colors are amazing on it. So it has, it'll have these bright red buds all winter, and then they blossom into these deep, fuzzy red flowers that become the leaves. And everybody knows what maple trees look like in the fall, right? And it makes maple syrup. What could be better?
Yeah.
So I did a whole book on the cycle of the maple tree throughout the year.
Okay.
And then the one I'm working on now is about a mother and her child. And they're playing in a sandbox. And they love building things, right? And they're building things out of the sand. And the child says, boy, wouldn't it be great if we could have a really big space to build really big things? And the mother says, well, in America, there are desert areas. It's kind of like a big sandbox. And and so the kid goes, well, what would we put in there? Mother says, well, we could put a house for us, like Bandelier, this picture, right? So we could build a house like they have in Bandelier. We could have some water, like the Grand Canyon. We could grow some plants, right? So it goes on, and I take the book through different national parks out west to build their sandbox, their giant sandbox.
Yeah, and you just took a trip, right? Doing all that.
I did. So I have found, I don't know how it's been for you, but for me, I love to learn. I love to keep learning. And sometimes I have to push myself to do things that I know will move me further, even if they're a little intimidating.
Yeah.
And so I had seen these different, you can go away for a week and work with artists, right? And learn from them. And I'd always wanted to do it, but I never had done it. I wouldn't be good enough, whatever, whatever the voices in your head say. And finally, right?
Oh, I know.
And finally, last year, I said to myself, you know what? Voices be darned. I'm going to go. So I booked myself into a week-long art retreat. And it was in Santa Fe, New Mexico, which is beautiful.
Yeah.
That's where I saw Bandelier and made this picture of Bandelier, the caves there. And spent the whole week in the company of a number of other students and two instructors. And I'd also had a really rough beginning of the year.
Oh.
And I came back from that energized, released, invigorated, and at a new level.
Yeah.
And what they showed me around how to look at the world. In fact, we went to go to Georgia O'Keeffe's Ghost Ranch. So that's what this shirt is from.
Oh my! What? Georgia O'Keeffe's
I know,
Ghost
right?
Ranch.
She had a ranch in Santa Fe. And so it was an amazing step forward. And I came back from that not afraid of that anymore.
Yeah. Wow. So it's. I mean, I guess I'm like totally spelling it out, but it is rising to the occasion, challenging yourself, learning something new. It's always such a surprising journey.
Yes.
What you get out of it. I've quoted this before on this podcast, so forgive me, listeners, if you've heard me say this before, but Anne Lamott has a quote. Do you know Anne Lamott? Okay, it's fine. She's one of my favorite writers, but she has a quote that says, sometimes you think you need the tea service for the caffeine, but what you actually need is the tea service itself. And I personally that resonates with me, of like the journey of creating. And that's kind of what you're talking about as well.
I do. I absolutely love it. There's something about creating that is so deeply fulfilling. And then there's a song, it's not a fancy song, it's Anna Nalick, 2 a.m. And she's singing about how she has to write, it's 2 a.m., she's got a song inside of her, she has to write it down so it doesn't just do her in. And I feel like that sometimes about my pictures. It's like, it's in my head, I've managed to figure out where all the pieces are going to go, and I must make it happen in the world.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, like we were saying earlier, with the podcast. I'm just talking because it has been like for so long. I felt like something inside me was spinning
Yes.
around. I'm
Yes.
talking about, and it was just I have to do something
Right.
creative to get this out. And ever since it's almost another quote I think I got from Aunt Lamott or somebody, but it's like driving down a highway and you can only see as far as the headlights,
Yes.
but you can do a whole trip
And that's all you can
and
see.
and that's all you can see, but you don't know where you're going when you're doing it.
Right.
And it's just I don't know. I don't know what pieces I picked up slowly to make the decision to make this happen, but yeah, here
You
we are.
stand at the shore and the rest is unknown.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's beautiful, it's scary, it's terrifying. You feel like you don't know what you're doing half the time.
But there is something so joyfully releasing in being able to get that thing in your head, be able to birth the thing
Yeah.
that's in your head. Right now, we've had a couple of deaths in the family.
Yeah, I
Like
know.
3 in 2 months.
I
You know
know.
who does that?
So
It's terrible.
So sorry.
It's terrible.
Yeah.
But one was very unexpected. And I was talking to the widow, the wife. What a word, right? And she was telling a story about being so distraught and wanting a sign that it was going to be okay. She was out in her backyard. She looked up, and across the sky flew a bright pink spoonbill. So it's a big bird. It's bright pink. It's very unusually shaped, and it doesn't live in cities.
Yeah.
It lives out in the middle of nowhere. It turns out her husband had spent lots of time out in the middle of the bayous, this was in Louisiana, fishing, and talked about the spoonbills all the time. So there it was. There was the sign. And, I've got a list of things to paint, right? I got a whole list of stuff I'm supposed to be painting. But all of a sudden, I was moved to figure out how to capture this. And so that's what I was working on this morning was how am I going to capture the wonder of that moment? And I've actually got the spoonbill alighting in a tree, and I've got her garage over to the side, and it's going to be a very high bar to reach to do the feathers and the light, because it's all about light, right? But I'm so it's giving me comfort, and it's giving me joy,
Yeah.
and you can't ask for much more than that.
No. You can't, especially having gone through
Right.
recent tragedy, recent trauma, right? So, it's beautiful. So, how do you paint light? I'm just curious. Maybe.
Well, it turns out there's so many things you learn along the way, right? It turns out that, and I find this fascinating, in order to see something as light, it needs to be next to something very dark.
Okay.
So there's a sort of a yin yang wholeness to it that I find very appealing. You have to have the dark in order to see the light.
Yeah.
And I just remind myself of that when things are challenging.
Yeah.
Like, oh, right.
Yes. This is bad, so
right.
this can be great.
That's right. Can I tell you something else about color?
Yeah.
That I found very fascinating that she goes into? Is the fact that color, you think of it as just a thing, right? But she points out that color is actually sometimes chemical and sometimes physical. So the darkest darks, like you see on some butterflies, it's a physical structure that bends the light, that physically bends the light.
Really?
To make it look black, like the blackest of black.
Yeah.
And other colors that are chemical, it's all these little electrons kind of floating around there, and in comes the light beam, and it moves them. So it's actually an interaction happening.
Oh, wow.
And it is absorbing some, and it's rejecting others. And so you see what's rejected, right?
Yeah.
But it's moving the electrons around. So, not to get existential, but let's do it. If you think about us as people as being just these little atoms vibrating around, hanging out next to each other, yes, nothing is anything that you think it is.
Right. Which is sort of like a mind bend in of itself once you start thinking about that. Yeah, because thinking about, like, when you were talking, it made me think about how everything is, color only exists in its relation to light.
Yes. And in relation to each other.
Yeah, so it is sort of, nothing is what you think it
Nothing is what
is.
you expected. So I've got, like the spoonbill I'm doing, I have to think about where is the darkest darks so that the lightest lights are going to show up.
Yeah,
And then what is the color I'm going to put next to it so it actually looks darker? Because, like if you think you've got red, blue, and yellow,
yeah,
and from that comes everything else.
yeah,
So if I have red for the pink, it's all these different pieces upon pieces. So probably I'm going to put brown in the darkest because brown contrasts to blue because it's yellow and red.
okay.
With a little bit of blue.
Yeah, that's really cool to think about it that way. Did you say the names of your books?
Oh, yeah, sure. The first one is How Many Will We Find?
Mm-hmm.
And the other one is My Friend the Maple Tree.
Okay, yes.
And you can find them on my website, juliamarshall.com,
Mm-hmm.
or Julia Marshall Paints on Instagram or Facebook.
Okay.
So that's where I post what I'm learning or what I'm seeing.
Yeah, what you're looking at. And you travel a lot. And you like to paint nature, right?
Yeah.
Do you ever do inside stuff?
I do sometimes, but really, there's something so deeply rewarding about being out with it sounds hackneyed, but it's so true, right? Go out and look at a tree, for heaven's sakes, right?
Yeah.
Looking at a tree, looking at a flower, there's universes of beauty in a tree or in a flower. And so that draws me a lot more than inside the four walls.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's lovely about that is I'll be on a trip, I'll be taking a hike somewhere and I'll take pictures. And then when I'm back inside the four walls and I'm painting, I'm actually back there again. And I'm thinking about it in a deeper, different way. I'm thinking about it in, what was actually happening with that flower that I saw or that tree that I saw? And, what was on top of what? And how did the flower actually open? So
Yeah.
it gives a whole new dimension.
Yeah. To the
To
story.
the experience. Can I tell you another thing about color?
I would love to.
So another thing about color that I'm struggling with right now. I've got a palette. People will sell you all kinds of stuff.
Who are these, like art shops?
Art shops will sell you everything, right? I mean,
Okay.
look at all the colors, right?
Wow.
There's
Yeah.
like a million colors on there. But actually, if you want the picture to be harmonious, you should only use a few.
Okay.
And if you think about nature, a leaf, it's only got a couple of different colors to make all of everything that goes on. And so if I use 800, it doesn't work together. So I'm trying to paint with a max of 5 or 6 colors.
Okay.
That's what I'm trying to do. And do the whole range of like light greens to dark greens with like one blue and one yellow. So that's a challenge.
Is that a technique that you started, or did you pick that up from somewhere?
It is a recommendation from folks who are very good with being able to depict good artists. Because it's a way that you can make your colors harmonize. And if you're painting nature, it's actually what's really there.
Just a few.
Just a few. It's just different mixes to get them to different places.
What kind of art do you like to look at?
We were at the VMFA on Thursday with my wife and our oldest daughter and her girlfriend. And I was walking around and realized I can look at the pictures with new eyes now. So there was one picture that most of the crew was voting very boring.
Will not be named.
Will not be named. It's 2 great big red canvases and giant, wall-sized, and a thin line, a thin rectangle around each one, and they were different colors. The rectangle was a light green in one and something else in the other, maybe dark blue. And what was really fascinating about it was, one of the things that was fascinating was the red behind looked completely different depending on what the little rectangle was. So everybody was like, that's boring. I'm like, well, wait a minute. Look, 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 look. So I was able to see that.
Yeah.
And then I actually think I might be starting to enjoy abstract.
Yeah.
There was another incredibly beautiful picture that it was very abstract, but you could see, but it was very energetic. And you could see the way the lines angled in and the way that they had darks on the left and the lights would take you back. So it actually walked you into the picture with just the lines and the colors. And I thought, how did they do that? That was, that's fascinating.
Yeah. That is fascinating. I like abstract art, but I don't ever know what it means. I'm always sort of like, that's interesting.
Do you think it has to mean?
I think it has to make you feel. I think it has to make you think.
Agreed.
And yeah, I don't think it ever has to mean, I don't think it has to have meaning. And honestly, I think about this a lot with writing too, because I think about books all the time, is a lot of times like an author will write something and it didn't actually mean that to the author. But if you, the reader, take it that way and it has that meaning, does it really matter that the author didn't intend it? So it's kind of the same thing with paintings and drawings and such.
I think that's a great, one of the things they talk about when they talk about art is that it's a conversation. The artist puts out something, a book, a painting, and then the person comes to it and brings their own stuff. And then the art is actually the conversation between those two things.
Yeah.
It's not what's on the wall, it's not the person, but it's that in-between conversation.
Yeah.
And I think that's true. And I think what's interesting about that is it mirrors life. So you have two people and they're having a conversation, but really one person is bringing one thing, another person is bringing one thing, and there's something else happening between them.
Yeah. Yeah, and it is, we're all so different. And I think if there's anything I've gotten from doing this, from talking to so many people about life experiences, is really seeing how different people are. And so, you think you're bringing one thing to the conversation, but however the other person interprets it might be totally different. And that's usually good, sometimes bad.
Well, it's interesting. It is. I spend a lot of time thinking about, how will somebody interpret this?
If you were to talk to somebody who was thinking about getting into art and wanting to be an artist, what would you say to them?
What a wonderful idea. It's going to be scary or not.
Yeah.
Fun or not. But go for it.
Yeah.
Get some good advice. Talk about it with others, right? So I find doing it by myself, I get in my own head. Doing it with others, I can get their perspective that I didn't know.
Yeah.
And recognize it as an opportunity to learn to be vulnerable and to grow.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's no growth without vulnerability.
Right.
Yeah. So, and do you have like a community of artist friends that you're in touch with?
Well, interestingly enough, I stayed with the studio class that Dawn Flores does at the VMFA. And a friend of mine, Mina, we take it together.
Oh.
So we've been doing that class for forever, and we sit in the back room. So like the new students are up front, we're in the back room doing our thing, and we co-mingle. But it is a community activity. And I can imagine one day when I retire, I can get more into the artist community. So I've picked up several different friends in the artist community, but it takes a lot of energy. And I'm an introvert. So I got to decide where I'm going to spend my extrovert pennies.
Yeah. Yeah. And coming back to the book, I always ask, who would you recommend Color by Victoria Finley?
I think people who want to know, the world is so full of so many things and they're often interconnected. So anybody who has a love of understanding the interconnected nature of the world, I think would really enjoy it. And anybody who is learning about color and wants to have more of a reverence for our human ability to leverage color and understand how much we love it and how much we've drawn to it over the centuries, I would recommend it to them too.
Okay. Good. Well, I think you have to be a very thoughtful person thinking about all of this stuff. And I feel like listening to Victoria Finley yesterday, I was like, I can see why Julia. It just seems like you are both types of people who really like to understand and learn maybe things that other people might just sort of breeze over. Yeah, it was beautiful.
I always want to know the story behind the story.
Yeah. And so what is something that we can shine a spotlight on for you that you're working, like any kind of projects you've got coming up? Obviously, we already talked about the book coming out that you're working on. Is that the main thing? And then also the picture you're working on.
I think mostly the check out my website.
Mm-hmm.
Go check out the books.
Yeah.
I think they're lovely. I think one of my daughters was working in a preschool, and they had my friend the maple tree, and she says, "Oh, it's so well thumbed. They love it."
Oh, good.
So I recommend that, and keep tuned in for when the next one comes out.
Okay. Well, good. Well, this is lovely. Thank you so much for joining me today and enjoying the boulevardier. It's also, I think American, you can just say boulevardier or something.
There you
but
go.
I actually knew I was going to mess up how to say it if I didn't do it the French way, so I kept it.
I love it. And thank you very much for inviting me. It's been an honor.
Yeah, my pleasure. Well, good. And then we hit. Thank you for spending some time with me and my guests for an episode of Drinks in the Library. For more information about the show, you can find us on Instagram at Drinks in the Library, on the World Wide Web, drinksinthelibrary.com, or shoot me an email at drinkspod@gmail.com. Until next time, cheers.